Hi everyone, welcome back to AP Psychology with me, Miss Baines, your teacher, and where you, my students, can take advantage of being able to pause and rewind me as I deliver you our latest content. So go ahead and grab those markers, get yourself in a nice and comfy space, and of course, don't forget those ever important binder notes that go in lockstep order with this video called Unit 6, Video 2, Part 2, and you can find those on page 3 of your new binder notes. I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so today we're going to go over environmental influences on human behavior. So make sure that if you haven't seen part 1 where we talked about genetic influences on human behavior, you'll want to watch that one first and complete those notes first on pages 1 and 2. These, again, are on page 3. Okay, let's go ahead and get started by talking about environmental influences on our behavior. It's easy to say how the environment, which is every other thing than your genetics, impacts behavior, right? It's how you were raised, right? It's easy to say that, well, kids these days, it's all about the parents and the way they were raised. These parents need to be more strict. It's all about the parenting. It's all the parents' fault when the kids are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. There's a funny little comic here on the slide that jokes, nature versus nature. Either way, it's always your parents' fault, right? Ha ha ha. I mean, both do absolutely play a huge role upon who we are. However, we must point out that nurture is so much more than that. It's so much more than just how you're raised. And so we're going to look at these 5 categories there on your notes on page 3. So first up, we're going to look at prenatal environmental experience with the very important brain development, and then there's parental influences, and then there's peer influences, and then there's cultural background, and finally we'll wrap it up with a discussion on gender, okay? All right, so let's talk about prenatal influences first. Oftentimes when we talk about nurture, we think that it begins the minute the baby is born, right? When you enter the world, you're interacting with your environment. But that's not totally true. It doesn't begin at birth, it begins in the womb, as they say, from the womb to the tomb. Okay, so it's before that. It's before you make contact with the outside world. And maybe you're like, wait, it's not the baby's fault what they're learning from the outside world. They haven't even seen it yet. Nope, that's totally wrong. The baby isn't out of the world yet. It is, though, interacting with the environment. Here's the thing. If the mother were to introduce some kind of poison or take drugs or smoke nicotine or vape cartridges or alcohol consumption, or if she has some kind of illness like influenza or contracts the flu or measles or chickenpox, or let's just say she was poor or homeless and has a terrible relationship with the baby's father and therefore has excessive amounts of cortisol or stress built up, right? All of these are environmental factors that can influence the developing fetus. And because the fetus was fed through the umbilical cord, which is attached to the mother, okay, so the baby gets all of that instead of just getting food, blood, and oxygen and nutrients. We call these teratogens, and you need to make sure you write those down. So I included some pictures here of pregnant women who are very far in their pregnancy doing each one of these things just to show how shocking it is to see it when it's happening, okay? It really does have a huge impact on the developing fetus. Okay, let's move on to a baby's first early experiences. Baby's experiences have a huge impact on brain development. If it's a rich environmental experience, it will help the infant develop their brain's neural connections. And you're probably saying, yeah, obvio. More experience makes our brains develop better. We've learned that about 20 times now, Miss Baines. However, it's a little more sciencey than just that. As we know from our biology unit, all about neurons and action potentials, it is all about the neural connections that make those deep wrinkles and folds in the cerebral cortex. This was substantiated through tons of research, particularly with rats and mice. So you'll see here, if they lived in an enriched environment, the lab rats developed a heavier, thicker cortex, right? A cerebral cortex was much thicker. And if you look at this image down below, you kind of see the neuron looks so much more connected, right? With lots of little tree branches, the one that has the enriched environment next to it, right? The neural networks and the synapses become so much stronger and so much more prolific. This seems to hold true for children as well as infants who are learning more meaningful developments and are picked up and talked to, and you make funny faces at them, right? All this is called FaceTime. I know, not that FaceTime, obviously, but you know, you get the gist of it. These babies actually gain more weight, which is good. They develop faster neurologically. The idea being that if they're not stimulated, the maturing brain operates on a use it or lose it principle, which again should be a reminder to you from back in the biological basis unit. We've talked about the first two categories. Let's talk about the third one, called peer influences. There's something in psychology that we call the selection effect. And now I want you to think back to elementary or maybe even middle school, particularly middle school, right? This is the effect where kids start choosing friends who are similar to themselves, at least similar in important ways to them. And you'll often find times friends will even start to sort of look alike when they have a lot of different things in common, whether it's the sports that they participate in, or the clubs that they join, or how they achieve in school even, right? If they're more of a top performing student or a middle or even low performing student, all those things will be heavily in common with other kids that have the same aspects. Okay, those subtle behaviors and appearances will start coming into their face in the way their body language and the way they sort of laugh and all of that stuff. While nature does seem to play a role in influencing school-age kids, it is with our peers that we spend most of our time playing, working, and being with, right? So nature may predispose us to be sensitive to, say, their styles, their opinions, and obviously if we have things in common with them, like music and the games we like to play. Personality is also very biologically determined. If we have things in common with these people, though, we're going to be attracted to them because we have those biological things going on in our brain, right? We connect to them naturally, having those traits ourselves. So parental and peer influence seem to be complementary, okay, in shaping one's life and one's brain, okay? Parents and the peers are super important. Parents influence our ideas, our educational choices, discipline us, give us a lot or very little responsibility. So that's how much they have to discipline us to do, like work, or how many chores we do, what is our work ethic like, how committed are we to finishing or achieving our goals, are we tidy, are we orderly or not, are we messy, charitable, loyal to others, and how we interact with authority. Are we followers? Are we going to do what the law says, or are we going to be little rebels going up against authority? What kind of teenager do you think I was? How about planning our futures? Whereas peer influence our ideas on senses of cooperation and popularity, interaction with others, they all kind of complement each other. Before we move on to the effects of culture on human behavior, let's define, okay? So culture, meaning behaviors, ideas, attitudes, and traditions that are shared by a large group. It seems kind of silly to define something that you seem to know so well, but it is important. Cultures differ, right? They're all so very different, and then in turn, they cause us as individuals to be unique or different. So in psychology, we don't necessarily study culture per se, but we do study how culture influences the individual. And that happens through things that we call norms. These are the rules for accepted and expected behavior of people within a particular culture. And different norms often confuse us in that we don't really understand why it's different, because if it's so ingrained in us, right? And living in a place like Queens, we have so many cultures coming together at work and school and play. And we don't really understand why other cultures might do something that we do differently. And it's because those things are so ingrained deeply into our primitive reptile brains, right? The way we do it in our own culture seems like the only way. And so when we see somebody doing it differently, it just seems so odd. Hence why some people say they come with cultural baggage. One big cultural influence is how we navigate, say, personal space, right? We each have like this zone around us in which we want to maintain an invisible little fence around our bodies and get kind of weirded out by those close talkers when somebody's like right here talking to you, or when somebody, I don't know, like touches us while we're talking. If we're not like friendly with them like that yet, it's kind of weird. Or when some people are very up close and personal and they'll just like hug and kiss as soon as they meet, even after they've just met one time, or total strangers within the same culture. It might be very acceptable. In some cultures, it's very acceptable to just go up to somebody you're meeting new and hug them and, you know, give them a kiss on the cheek or two cheeks in France, right? I had to get used to that when I was visiting my daughter. But I kind of liked it. I don't know, it's very sort of nice. But of course, in many cultures, you cannot go up and kiss another man's wife who's not in your own family. Other examples might be the shaking of hands, right? Some people even bow when they meet a new person. Some people may not even make eye contact when you talk to them, which in some cultures means you cannot, under any circumstances, ever trust that person, right? If you can't look them in the eye. If they can't look me in the eye, I can't trust them. But in many cultures, when somebody puts their head down and looks down with their eyes, they're doing it out of respect for you, right? That they don't know you very well yet, and they're not gonna like zoom in on your eyes. Okay, there are also those differences in levels of expressiveness. One culture may be very expressive, say with their hands. Take me, for example. I'm constantly talking with my hands and moving them around. There's even a kid in my 8th period class that mimics me all the time. So I don't know, I think it's kind of funny that he does that, but I'm not even really sure where I got that from. How about cultural differences, even in facial features or body language? There's this newish joke called the RBF, or resting bitch face, in which others perceive a person to be rude or angry when they're just keeping to themselves or just being quiet. And some people get really turned off when they're not like expressive and happy and smiley with their hands and they're gesturing. And some people are used to just being really like demure or quiet or shy. We Americans are very much also about timeliness, right? A meeting starts at a certain time, you better be there at that certain time. If you're late, that's on you, and you look selfish and you look bad and you're not going to get the job. Whereas in a lot of other cultures, meeting times are much more flexible. Like, they're not totally set in stone, and if people show up a few minutes late, it's like, hey, it's okay, you're fashionably late. Hey, you've got a life. So do we. So do I. So do you. We get it. All cultures are different. Don't worry about it. A different way to look at things, right? So I want you to look at these two terms, individualism and collectivism. So different cultures look at different things in different ways. I want you to look at these two terms, individualism and collectivism. Both do influence child rearing, but these are the bigger than just child rearing things, okay? So individualism or individualistic cultures, and this is super important for you to get down, by the way. This perspective or viewpoint on life is more popular in Western cultures, right? Where some might say that that's where capitalism reigns, right? In the West. Okay, we want kids to think for themselves. We want you to be independent, true to what you think deep down inside. Be true to yourself. Set your own personal goals. To remember this, it's oftentimes in Western cultures where you go by your first name, right? It's your individual name, your given name. Whereas your surname, or the name of your family, comes after your first name. In a collectivistic culture, or an Eastern or more Asian and some African cultures, it's much more common to emphasize the family honor and the family dignity. And they believe when you do something, you not only shame yourself, you're shaming your family. And so there's a lot more pressure there, a greater concern for social harmony. And people tend to be a little more shy with strangers then, right? Because you're not just representing about you, you're representing your entire family. oftentimes, not all the time, but often you'll see the surname that people go by comes first. And some people don't even have a given name, or what we call first names or middle names at all, right? That sounds so weird to us over here in America. Anyway, here's the thing with that. Although these differences exist, there are a lot of similarities also within cultures. And that's because we are all still human beings, right? We are all related and impacted by the fact that we're the same species. And people around us all need basic things to survive and thrive. And the human element makes it very much the same. Alrighty, let's talk quickly now about the last one, which is gender. I mean, we're going to talk about both nature and nurture within the framework of gender roles. Genders differ dramatically, right? Like, it's just a fact that they have different chromosomes on a biological level, right? The sex, the X versus the Y chromosomes that signal the production of different hormones. So one person is biologically a female, right? When a female zygote, a fertilized egg, and then when the male gives his sperm, it is either an X or a Y, the determination of what the sex is going to be. So if it's a male and it's an X and a Y, and a female is an XX, every single time, no matter what, females give two X's, but the dad can give an X or a Y. So gender is biologically, right? The sex is determined at conception by the father's contribution of the fertilization process. But nurture also plays a role with gender, and that's because gender is also socially determined. It's what we call gender roles, right? These are the expectations from a particular culture, you could say, cultures as well as over time, right? The expectations for women in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s was very, very different from those that started in the 60s, 70s, and up till now. Okay, as I make this video in 2024, what they were doing in the 1950s was completely different. Okay, and then there's gender identity. So gender roles is what the culture expects, which is pretty much impacting how you fulfill those roles or not. Gender identity is your own sense of being male or female, how you identify yourself, okay? And there's kind of a continuum there. Gender identity is your own sense of being male or female. It's how you identify yourself. And there's kind of a continuum there on how female or how masculine you feel about yourself. And then there's a term called gender typed. And this gender typed is the acquisition or acquiring or getting of masculine or feminine roles and traits. So how you acquire your gender identity. So some people are gender typed throughout their entire lives, and how they acquire their gender identity is what you do or learn to be in order to act masculine or act feminine and be feminine. And these are things that can happen through yourself and through your own cognitive processes, but oftentimes it's also through the observation of others in terms of genders and what they like to do or what they have most in common. So I wanted to briefly talk about traditional gender roles. I'm going to let you pause and kind of take a look through these, because to me, I feel like people today probably have a rather firm grasp on this already. And the quote, traditional gender roles, is that the woman stays home, right? Her job is to stay home, take care of the house, raise the kids, support her husband, right? I'm talking real traditional roles here, okay? Not that traditional roles are bad, right? Lots of people have lives like that and love that, and I would love that now. When it comes to their sex lives, women were expected to be naive and passive, whereas men were expected to be more dominant and take the lead in sexual exploration, okay? Supporting their families financially. They are the breadwinners, right? They take the initiative in forming a coupled relationship with a woman, and this starts to impact things in the home, even like how mom and dad act in the house, right? These are not negative things, right? You just know that mom's going to clean the house while dad goes outside and does the lawn work or takes out the garbage, right? But it also starts to impact occupations. and then an outlook that a young girl or a young boy might have on what jobs that they can fulfill, and so on. So nowadays, it seems like the world is open to everybody for whichever gender. They don't really care what the job is, and you can do whatever you want. All right, let's quickly wrap this up by talking about the theories about gender and how we are gender typed, okay? How we acquire those gender roles or gender identities. In one branch of psychology, there's what we call social learning theory, in which we learn through social interaction. So children learn gender and linked behaviors by observing and imitating probably mommy or daddy, right? As well as through rewards and punishments, right? Observational learning and operant conditioning is meant to be through association, right? They make an association about something being feminine or something being masculine, and it's not necessarily all based on the messages that children get from their parents only. As research has shown that even if parents discourage traditional gender roles, many children begin to cling to traditional boy-girl roles on their own. As much as mom tells her boys, hey boys, you gotta go help your sisters clean the house, and you're gonna do that laundry, boy children will often organize themselves into boy chores. Girls, too, would often rather stay and clean up the dinner dishes with mom than take out that stinky garbage, right? However, some girls will say, I'm going to keep my hair short like a boy, or a boy will grow his hair long like a girl, without even caring a thing about gender roles or even thinking about gender identity. So who knows these days, right? And then there's gender schema theory. This is the social learning theory that we just talked about, plus cognition. Right? And when you think cognition, think thinking. So children learn from their cultures, period. Children learn from the people around them, their peer groups, their parents, that's all good. Social learning theory. But if a concept of what it means to be male or female arises and they think about it, right? They take the time to think about it, right? They don't just let their hair grow long. They're thinking about the process of looking like a girl, right? That's gender schema theory. So if you compare yourself with the concept of gender, of what girls and boys normally do consciously, then you will follow instead. So boys might not want to do a sewing project at summer camp because they perceive that as a girly thing. Or they might not want to keep their hair long because long hair is a girly thing. Or vice versa for girls. Girls at summer camp might feel pressure or even themselves prefer not to go play football. Or they may not want to go out. They might just want to just go and do arts and craft, okay? As long as they're making a conscious decision based on gender, though, they think about it being girl or boyish, then it's the second type. If it includes the child thinking about what she or he is observing about genders, then they're making a decision to act from there, and it's gender schema theory. If there's no thinking, it's social learning theory. If there's thinking about it, it's gender schema theory. Okay? That's it for today. Hope you have a great night. Bye now.